So let's bring in former U.S. Attorney General Alberto Gonzales. He served in the George W. Bush administration and now is the dean at the Belmont University College of Law. And we thank you very much for being on this morning.
Mr. Attorney General, thank you so much for being with us. I've noted on this show over the past several years, Republicans like yourself, Republicans that have stood up and spoken out for the rule of law, even when it doesn't break in their direction. And I often quote the Wall Street Journal editorial page whenever they've spoken out against Donald Trump's worst excesses. I have noticed, though, since the last indictment regarding January the 6th, that establishment Republicans that had been critical of Donald Trump's actions are now starting to talk about a two-tiered justice system. And, you know, I read something that Ann Applebaum said last week that said if the Republican Party continues to attack the rule of law, I don't know how our constitutional republic survives. That's why we were so struck by your opinion piece and are so grateful for you to be here. Can you talk about your concerns about the rule of law, the Republican Party, and how it intersects in this Trump indictment?
Sure, Joe. Thanks for having me. Listen, I don't view my presence here or the op-ed that I wrote as intended to set Republicans straight, but mainly to remind Republicans about what we stand for, and in particular to stand up for the Department of Justice. People don't realize that over 99% of the people that work at the department are career employees. They often don't care who the president is, who the attorney general, what part of the attorney general is. And so they go to work day in and day out. And I just wanted to remind people that I think the department is doing the very best that it can. I'm not saying that they're perfect. Sometimes mistakes are made, and I point that out in the op-ed. But by and large, they do a good job. And the differences that occur sometimes in prosecutions are based upon facts, based upon the evidence, based upon the judgment and experience of the prosecutor. And so sometimes you're going to have perhaps different outcomes in cases that look similar, but may in fact be very different because of the facts and the evidence that a prosecutor is able to present and get in a trial. So again, this is about a reminder who we are as a party. A party for the rule of law, a party for economic and individual liberty, a party for national security and our military, a party that believes in the value, the importance of law enforcement. That's who we are as a party. And I just, again, that was the motivation for the op-ed.
Well, and just to underline something that you said, that they are career professionals. Most people in the Justice Department are. And for Republicans, for Donald Trump supporters who were saying, oh, well, what about Hillary Clinton? What about Hunter Biden? Let me underline again the fact that Donald Trump wanted Hillary Clinton indicted in the Department of Justice, and his own attorney general said there wasn't anything to indict her on. So those arguments are absolutely without merit. Mr. Attorney General, I want to underline once again what you said and have you continue talking about it, because I've noticed that my former party, which used to support law enforcement since Donald Trump's become president, many people in that party have attacked the Department of Justice relentlessly, have attacked the FBI relentlessly. Talk about the importance of Republicans doing what Republicans used to do, and that is defending the rule of law and defending the Justice Department that holds that on its shoulders every day, those professionals.
Well, we all, as American citizens, have an obligation to respect and to protect the rule of law. Let's just get that straight, put that on the table. But it is a Department of Justice that has the primary responsibility as a government institution to protect the rule of law. To ensure that people engage in conduct that is consistent with the laws passed by representatives of the American people. And the more the department is criticized, and sometimes the criticism is valid. There's no question about it. Mistakes get made because the department is run and comprised of human beings, and we are all imperfect, and sometimes we make mistakes in judgment. But by and large, they get it right. And of course, we have a system of rules of evidence and judges and independent jurors who ensure that the department gets it right in terms of moving forward on prosecutions. But the more there's criticism of the rule of law, I think the more people lose confidence in the Department of Justice and in government generally. And I think that's a very dangerous position to be in. The fact that it's okay to criticize the Department of Justice and government officials needlessly. It's okay to ignore the rule of law. It's okay to ignore statutes. It's okay to ignore the Constitution. That puts us in a very dangerous place, in my judgment, as a country, and I think in the judgment of many other Americans, and not just Republicans in this country.
Mr. Attorney General, there's an interesting article, op-ed by Jack Goldsmith, who was the White House counsel in the Bush administration. You may have read it. He's more critical of the Department of Justice than you have been, but his bigger point is that however this case, however this trial and the prosecution of Donald Trump pans out, it could end up weakening the justice system in this country, because if he's sent to prison or if he's found guilty, you'll have a huge number of Americans who believe that he's been unfairly treated. Is there a way around that, do you think? Is there a way that this trial could be conducted in such a way that actually it would restore faith in the execution of justice in this country?
Well, one way that's being discussed, and I've sort of offered up an opinion about this as well, is that to have the trial televised. Federal trials are not televised, and you know, this is a case where perhaps it calls for public trial, so people can see how our justice system works, can see the evidence that a prosecution is going to present, can see the defense that's put on by Donald Trump and his lawyers, and have faith in the outcome, in the judgment of 12 independent jurors. So that might be one way in this particular case where the American people may be more willing, despite what Donald Trump may say publicly, the American people may be more willing to accept the outcome of the trial.
Former Attorney General Alberto Gonzales, thank you very much for being on the show this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And